The Kansas City Chiefs made a key move to ensure their dynasty can keep rolling along. We talk about what it is and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On NFL podcast. We're your daily NFL podcast, and I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher. I'm the host of Locked On Ravens and one of the many NFL experts here on our network, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today, making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day and a part of your day in general. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms. So in video form on YouTube, audio form wherever you get your shows. We are here, and you're not missing out on any content either which way. Today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We are back. We are so close to the NFL season kicking off. Ravens and Chiefs September 5th. And on today's show, we're going to be talking with Chris Clark of Locked On Chiefs in the first part of the show because Creed Humphrey got extended. We'll talk about that move and why it's really important to Kansas City's prospects both now and in the future. Then we'll talk with Gino Cammilleri of Locked On Eagles. The Eagles trade for Jahan Dotson. Did they finally find a fix for a long-term problem? Then in the final part of the show, Aaron Freeman will join us. He joined us last week on Monday, and AJ Terrell gets extended. So Aaron's coming back to talk about that move. So although any further ado, let's first get into our conversation with Chris Clark of Locked On Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs extend Creed Humphrey. Here with me to talk about that and more is Chris Clark, the host of Locked On Chiefs, one of them over there. And Chris, I know that this was something that the Chiefs essentially just needed to get done. Creed Humphrey, one of the best centers, if not the best center in the entire NFL. The Chiefs get him for 4 years, $72 million. I know the total specifics aren't known yet, but based off of that total value, how do you think the Chiefs made out? How do you think Creed Humphrey made out? Did one side win, or was it pretty fair for both?
I think it depends on how you look at it. I think if you look at it from the perspective of what centers were generally getting paid, the top center in the league was $13.5 million a year, so he got a $4.5 million boost on that. So if you look at it from that perspective, you would say Creed won out. I think the real argument, though, is that interior offensive linemen need to be looked at together at guards and centers. I think the center market was definitely undervalued, and this would put him closer to, he still would be a top 10 guard. So to me, I think it makes sense. I really wonder if this is going to help maybe get another contract done for the Chiefs in the coming days. We'll see if that happens. But I think this is a good deal for the Chiefs. They absolutely need to sign Creed to an extension. He is a fantastic player, and there's a lot to be liked about this contract and getting him extended a year early.
Yeah, that's a big part too, especially when there are going to be some centers coming down the pipeline who also will need big extensions. Tyler Linderbaum in Baltimore being, I think, the big one there. But you alluded to it there, Chris. Are there any other Chiefs extensions that could get done in the next few days, maybe as the season goes on? Are there any names you're looking at?
Trey Smith. I don't know if it gets done. We'll see. The big deal here, and this is something that we've talked about on Locked On Chiefs a ton, is Trey Smith and Creed Humphrey are best friends. I mean, those two guys, they've known each other for going back since before they were drafted, and they're best friends. I think that plays into whether or not Smith wants to stay in Kansas City. The other thing is, and it's hard to argue with, if Smith stays in Kansas City and you keep that interior basically intact, and you keep him with Patrick Mahomes and Creed Humphrey, the chances of the Chiefs repeating, or sorry, not even just repeating this year, but getting to the Super Bowl again and winning another Super Bowl or 2 or 3 in the future goes way up, keeping those two guys together. So I would be looking for Trey Smith to maybe get a contract extension in the coming days. I'm hopeful. We'll see. Haven't really heard any rumblings, but it would make a lot of sense if they could try to get it done, and he wants to stay.
Yeah, and it would be big. And I know with the Chiefs offensive line, Chris, you go back a couple of years, the Chiefs would place all 5 starters on their line. Obviously, We're a long way from that, and they've improved it dramatically since then. But Creed was one of those guys who they brought in, and now he's extended in Kansas City for the long term. But could you do a general offensive line outlook? You mentioned Humphrey. You mentioned Trey Smith. What is the overall consensus about Kansas City's line as it stands right now and them heading into the season?
I think you have to feel pretty good about it. I think, Jahan Taylor suffered an injury in camp, but it was said that it wasn't serious, so I expect him back for week 1. Joe Thuney is coming back from an injury. I would expect that he's going to start week 1, even though he hasn't played. I do think that was just, being precautionary and trying to give him as much rest as they can get him before the season starts. And you have a new left tackle in Kingsley Suamataia, and you look at who he's related to in the NFL. Obviously, they're not the same player. He's not the same player as Penei Sewell, who is his cousin, but he has the same bloodlines. I mean, they are cousins, so there's something there. But you look at the way he moves, what he's able to do. Are there going to be things that he's going to mess up as a rookie? Yeah, absolutely. He's not going to be, an all-pro his rookie year, I don't think, but I think he could be very good. And when you put him on this offensive line and have him being coached up by Andy Reid and Andy Heck, I think you have to feel pretty good about the Chiefs' offensive line this season.
And going back to Humphrey for a second, you mentioned that this needed to get done. He's one heck of a player. What are the things that he brings in terms of stability and just overall tenacity to this offensive line? I think he brings a lot of qualities that every team would love to have.
Yeah, and I mean, he doesn't allow pressure up the middle, and that is one of the easiest ways to get quarterbacks flustered and to get quarterbacks, to mess up is to bring pressure up the middle and make them throw the ball way before they want to. Edge rush is great, and that there's a reason why edge rushers are premium paid players. But defensive tackle pass rush is one of the biggest things. If you can get pressure right up the gut, that really affects quarterbacks. They can't step into their throws. It's going to affect everything in the offense. And he's been one of the best at not allowing pressure since he's been in the NFL. And I think that you look at this move, and I have a story over on Chiefs Corner, which is my Substack, and I kind of broke down the contract. I'm guessing he's going to get about $20 million in signing bonus based on some of the other contracts, probably $33 million guaranteed, like fully guaranteed. And I think the 50 that's been reported is probably an injury guarantee. This contract is going to break out. And I even saw somebody report that the 18 million is a real number. Like, it's not like a $25 million number at the end of the contract. So it's going to be pretty even. I still think this is a great signing for Kansas City. And if you can find a way to keep Creed Humphrey next to Trey Smith for the next 4 or 5 seasons, you have to feel like that is going to be phenomenal for this offensive line moving forward, especially if you get your young left tackle that you just drafted, and he could be good for the next 4 to 5 years.
And speaking of the offensive line and who they're protecting, obviously, and Patrick Mahomes back there at quarterback, Patrick Mahomes has some new weapons. And we know, Chris, we talked a lot last season about Kansas City and their receiving group and how they were going to potentially upgrade it this offseason. They bring in Marquise Brown, who did get injured in the preseason, although not season ending. There's potential he could possibly be back for week 1 at the very least, but maybe just early in the season. They draft Xavier Worthy in the first round as well. Rashee Rice factors into this equation also. How much of an upgrade do you think it is for this year's weapons for Mahomes versus last year, especially since Travis Kelce, of course, still part of the team?
It's huge. It cannot be understated how big of a difference it is from last year to this year, because you look at last year and you look at the fact that you have a situation with Travis Kelce going out in the first week and he's not able to play, and that happened. It was a freak injury in practice. And you bring in a guy like Hollywood Brown, who granted is probably not maybe a top 10 wide receiver, top 15 wide receiver in the NFL, but he does have a skill set. He does fit what they want to do, and he's going to stretch the field for him. And then you go draft a guy like Xavier Worthy, the fastest guy to ever run at the NFL Combine. And you go back to week 2 in the preseason and you go watch his touchdown from Carson Wentz. And it's, he gets a clean release. He does a stutter step move and he is past the DB and there is nobody in front of him. And he had 2 big plays in that game and probably only had maybe 10 or 11 snaps. So I do think that it's going to be something that they're going to be pushing, and they're going to be trying to push the ball down the field. The weapons, I think, are a big upgrade this year compared to what they were last year. And we'll see what happens.
And I think another big question too, Chris, is a lot of people look at Kansas City, obviously defending champs in multiple Super Bowls in the Mahomes-Reid tenure and era. But the 2023 regular season was not the best we've seen. In fact, it was very far from it for this Kansas City team. And so a lot of people are saying, oh, well, they lost a bunch of pieces. And I'm not trying to discount L'Jarius Sneed because he is a very, very big loss. They lost a couple guys too. But in your mind, based off of what you saw from them during the regular season last year, do you think that this version of the Chiefs is going to be better or worse than that? Because I think for the defending champs, a lot of people are saying, oh, well, they were the best team in the league last year when in the regular season. Objectively, that was not the case.
No, they absolutely weren't the best team in the season. And I think that there's a lot of people that forget how bad they were on offense at times last year. And bad is probably a little too harsh, but they weren't a great offense last year. They've been one of the league's top 3 offenses most of the seasons that Patrick Mahomes has played. And last year, they were definitely not there. And you saw it in the way they played. You saw in some of the games that came out. I mean, go look back at the Raiders game that they lost on Christmas Day. I mean, there was no kind of offense in that game. And I do think that the offense is going to be much better. I do think that if you go back to watch last year, I don't think Travis Kelce was probably healthy until maybe late in the season into the playoffs. When you watched what you saw in the playoffs, and that was a different Travis Kelce than you saw the first half of the season. And the other thing, I talked about Worthy, I talked about Brown. The biggest upgrade this year may even end up being Rashee Rice. Look at what he was at the end of the season last year and in the playoffs, and then to watch what he's been able to do in training camp and to know they're going to go in the season with him, which was a question a couple of months ago, whether or not he would be eligible to play this season, but it looks like he will be at this point. And if that is the case, I think he can easily make a case for being a top 15 wide receiver because of the way that they use him in this offense. And you look at all the other weapons that they're going to have, they're not going to be able to double him very often. And with the guys that are going to be challenging deep, he should be able to own the intermediate part of the field and do some of the underneath stuff that he's so good at.
Chris is great. For more on Chris, check him out over at Locked On Chiefs, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up with the second part of the show, Gino Cammilleri of Locked On Eagles will be joining us to talk about Jahan Dotson, that move for the Eagles, and a lot more. Stay tuned. Got a lot coming your way here on Locked On NFL. First, this show is brought to you by LinkedIn. And when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. For me, I've used LinkedIn a ton, finding jobs, networking, connecting. LinkedIn has it all. And LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else. Even those who aren't actively searching for a new job might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified count within 24 hours. Hire professionals like professional on LinkedIn. Post job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We are back for a second segment, Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Monday. Really appreciate everybody again for tuning in, making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day. Also, be sure to check out Locked On Fantasy Football. Make that your second listen of the day. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategy so you can win your league this season. That is also part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up now, we're going to be talking with Gino Cammilleri of Locked On Eagles about that Jahan Dotson move. So let's get into that conversation now. The Philadelphia Eagles made the rare interdivision trade with the Washington Commanders, and they acquired a former first-round pick in Jahan Dotson. Here to talk about that with me is Gino Cammilleri, one of the hosts over at Locked On Eagles. And Gino, I think for this move, there's a lot of good for the player and good for the team for Philadelphia. Obviously, we were talking about this before the show. Philly's been looking for that number 3 guy for a while. Obviously, there are no questions about A.J. Brown, no questions about Devonta Smith, but who was that other guy in that room to step up? Dotson hasn't necessarily performed to expectations, but a change of scenery could help. What were your thoughts on the move, and did you expect Philadelphia to be scavenging the trade market for somebody?
The expectation over at Locked On Eagles for Lou and I was that they, one way or another, are going to try and upgrade that wide receiver 3 spot, because let's take a step back. Before this trade, they were hoping that one of Britton Covey, Paris Campbell, rookie Johnny Wilson, rookie Anais Smith would really elevate their game to the point where you don't have to go and make a move. Well, if you saw the first couple preseason games, you saw us play each other, Baltimore versus the Eagles. You were waiting for somebody to really separate and be that guy that Kenny Pickett or Tanner McKee could target, to where you're saying, oh, we might be able to sneak a guy onto this roster that maybe we don't have to subject to waivers, which now that's in question because of this addition. And we'll get to that. But when you look at this move, Paris Campbell had not been on the field until the last preseason game. You didn't know what you had. Johnny Wilson, concussion protocol. Anais Smith, very, very raw and still developing as a prospect. They needed to upgrade. If you look at Quez Watkins and go to the Super Bowl, the biggest moment, he needs to step up and be an efficient player for 1 or 2 reps, and he does not follow through. He has a big drop in that game. And that's what the role for Jahan Dotson is going to be. You're not going to be the guy that's Steph Curry taking 30, 40 shots a game. We say over at Locked On Eagles all the time, you need to bring in that third man, or in a basketball sense, like a sixth man off the bench that can hit a corner 3 for you, that can spot up 3 to 4 times a game. And Jahan Dotson, all you have to do, let's say you average around 30 to 40 yards a game, that'll put you at that 500-yard total, which you've had in Washington, which the Eagles have been looking for since Nelson Aguilar back in 2017. The Quez Watkins experiment didn't work. Olamide Zacchaeus didn't work. Jahan Dotson at least has the body profile. He's a little bit taller, has a little bit more length. He is a little bit more undersized when it comes to his overall mass, but hey, man, he's separated at this level. He's produced at this level. If he has to step up to be a 2 for you in 3 to 4 games, I think he can do that. But to play this role that he's going to be asked to play, not only does that fit him well, I think he fits within this offense where Kellen Moore is going to make his job pretty easy with a lot of these motions, free release, use his ability to play in space, which probably is his best asset right now, and allow him to be the 4th, 5th option and just hammer home the guys up top. We know A.J. Brown and Devontae and Dallas Goedert are going to get fed, but when you are asked to produce inside of this offense, when the light is shining on you, you got to be able to make that play, man. And you got Saquon Barkley and all of these playmakers. If you can't make those plays, it's going to be clear who the odd man out is. But I think Jahan Dotson, for the cost that they got him for, still having a 3rd-round pick that you acquired from Miami in this draft, that's a Howie Roseman bread and butter move all day long.
Yeah, your assets have to work for you, and Howie Roseman certainly does a great job of doing that. And I know, we don't know how this is going to play out at the end of the day, but to you, do you feel like Philadelphia has finally broken through and solved this, or do you feel like this is a situation where it is kind of wait and see and figure it out? Because Dotson has all the potential in the world, but it feels like they finally might have found a guy that, after all the years of looking for a 3, who's that guy going to be? Feels like the solve might be here, Jahan Dotson.
I think if you're looking at it with any other expectation, was it really worth making the move in the first place? If you're making just a lateral move and you're willing to give up a fair amount of draft capital, which if you do all the math with the Jimmy Johnson future draft chart, it equates to around a 3rd-round pick in total that they gave up when you do all the math with the 5th that they acquired, the 2 7ths. You are expecting him to come in, and he's on a 2-year rookie deal. You could still potentially get that 5th-year option with him. This isn't just a 1-year Band-Aid. We're going to try and make it work. Or the other example I said over at our show was, you're not waiting until week 7 or 8 to go and make a Golden Tate trade like you did. You already have solved that issue right now. For the short term, it makes a boatload of sense to have a guy who's cost controlled for the next 2 years, where he's making under $3 million when you have so much invested already up top. It's a buy low. I don't think the risk is that high. Like, it's a medium risk. I mean, you really didn't shell out insane draft capital for this guy, and it's not the last year of his deal where you have to go and sign him to an extension. If he at least can hit his floor, which I believe is what he did the last 2 years in Washington, which is serviceable 2nd to 3rd receiver play in the NFL, it's well worth the investment, because right now you're saying, we got Jahan Dotson, or we were going to wait until the draft next year to use that 3rd-round pick potentially on a guy that we still have to hope comes in here and develops, after we already drafted 2 guys in Johnny Wilson and Anais Smith. Now you get into, are we putting them on the bench? Do they lose snaps? The whole development factor. well, let's bring in Jahan Dotson, who still can allow Britton Covey to play some of those slot minutes for you where he can use his short area quickness to win in that regard. And Paris Campbell could still be an asset for you to be schemed up as a gadget type of player. And Johnny Wilson, who's this mammoth on the outside. You're not going to hinder your offense and handicap yourself to an extent by having any of these guys out there where they only play one of those wide receiver roles, where Jahan Dotson, he could play inside, he could play outside. If you look at the numbers, it was 2-1 in terms of splits on the outside as opposed to the slot for him. So you're looking at 1,500 snaps, 1,000 on the outside, 500 on the inside. That's the type of player that this Eagles offense needed. You already had 2 premier wide receivers, but this next man up type of role, which in a Kellen Moore offense almost is a starter. You didn't have that guy. Howie Roseman says, no, we're not going to wait around. We have to go and get somebody because we know the expectation. The expectation is to compete. And how do you lose when you get to those deep season games? Depth and those next guys up. Jahan Dotson, when his number is called, I think he is the guy to get it done this year.
Gino brings awesome Eagles insight. And for more on Gino, check him out over at the Locked On Eagles podcast, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So a lot to get to here on Locked On NFL. Coming up, Aaron Freeman will be joining us to talk about A.J. Terrell getting a big money extension and what it means for Atlanta's defense moving forward. Stay tuned, plenty to talk about here on Locked On NFL. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. I love going on FanDuel, checking out all of the offers that they have. We have something a little different for you this time around. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So for the Ravens and Chiefs, they open up on FanDuel. The Ravens do is 2.5-point underdogs to Kansas City. If you like that line, head over to FanDuel. Let's visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and download America's #1 sportsbook. We return our final segment, Locked On NFL, here on Monday. Kevin Oestreicher still rocking out with you here. Again, appreciate everybody for being here on Locked On NFL today, making us a part of your day and your first listen of the day as well. If you have a friend or a family member who's an NFL fan, they want daily NFL content, we are here for you and here for them 5 days a week. So be sure to spread the word. We really appreciate that. Coming up in the final part of the show here, Aaron Freeman of Locked On Falcons, who joined us last week to talk about Matt Judon and Justin Simmons, joins us to talk about A.J. Terrell getting extended. So let's talk with him now. The Atlanta Falcons are staying busy after acquiring 2 stars. They extend another one in A.J. Terrell. Here to talk about that with me and more is Aaron Freeman, the host of Locked On Falcons. And Aaron, this Falcons team, they are trying to bolster their defense in any way they can, but part of that is keeping the stars for the long term. And that's certainly what's going on here with A.J. Terrell, one of the top corners in this league. 4 years, $81 million total, $50+ million guaranteed. These cornerback contracts, we know for the stars, they're big. A.J. Terrell certainly got his money. How do you think that all parties did? Do you think this was a good deal for the Falcons, a good deal for Terrell? What was kind of your initial reaction to the deal and how everybody was able to make out?
Yeah, this was about right where I thought A.J. Terrell would sign for. We got a couple of deals this offseason to guys like L'Jarius Sneed and Jalen Johnson in that $19 million range. You had a player from that same draft class in 2020 in Trevon Diggs signing in that $19 million range. So I was wondering if we would get A.J. Terrell just under $20 million or just over 20, and we got him just over $20 million. So I think that's exactly what you're expecting from both sides. If you're A.J. Terrell, you're happy with this deal. I'm sure a lot of people looked at this deal hoping that maybe he could move the cornerback market forward, but I think you're waiting for Sauce Gardner and Patrick Surtain to really do that. I don't think A.J. Terrell was really in a position coming off 2 years where he had 0 interceptions. And while he's played really well in those 2 seasons, the fact is that on-ball production is kind of what really helps you at the negotiating table when it comes to these big deals. So I think it works out for A.J. Terrell. He gets basically the second highest paid cornerback in the NFL until Sauce and Surtain sign their deals probably in the next year or so. And that's a good place for him to be. And I think this is a good price for the Falcons to get him at.
And I think the cornerback no interception conversation, Aaron, definitely filters into the pass rusher sack equation as well, where it's like, oh, the interceptions and the sacks is all everybody sees, but the cover grades, the pressures when you're talking about those positions. Those are some of the underrated parts. And I think that's what made AJ Terrell a pretty underrated corner in this league, despite his pretty elite play. There's been a lot of conversation after this extension about corners, where AJ Terrell ranks among guys. Do you have him as a top 5 guy in the league, top 10 guy in the league, maybe top 15? Where do you kind of put him in those conversations?
It's hard with cornerback rankings because it changes year to year, because like no one, that's one of those positions that's so up and down. So
Right.
like I probably put him in the top 10 somewhere, but I don't know where exactly. But to me, like I kind of judge it on like, do I trust him to go up against number 1 receivers? And if I feel like he can hold his own against the best receivers in the NFL, like that's good enough for me. So whether that's the top 5 guy, that's a top 12 guy, to me is pretty irrelevant to that conversation. You talk about the ball production. Yeah, he doesn't get a lot of interceptions, but like if the job is to prevent completions, AJ Terrell is one of the best in the league. PFF has a metric called forced incompletions. He's been, I think he's top 3 in the league over the last 3 seasons at that position. So if the job is to prevent other receivers from catching the football, then yeah, I guess AJ Terrell's top 3 in that regard. So he definitely, I think, is one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL. And certainly in terms of what he brings to the Falcons defense, of being a guy that you can trust to go up against, number 1 wide receivers and be able to hold his own. I think he certainly passes that test.
And now Terrell under contract for 4 more seasons. And with that, Aaron, the Falcons also signed Justin Simmons to a 1-year contract. Can you kind of give an outlook on the short and long-term prospects of this secondary now that you know that Simmons is there for at least the season and Terrell is going to be there for the long haul?
Yeah, I think right now you like where most of this secondary is. The one question mark in the Falcons secondary is the cornerback spot opposite AJ Terrell. They've had a different starter at that spot every season since AJ Terrell entered the NFL in 2020. That's not going to change in 2024 with Mike Hughes expected to be the starter there. That's the one big question mark. You have your nickel cornerback in D. Alford, who's entering, I think, his 3rd year in the NFL, and he's played pretty well in that role. So you're hoping that he can kind of solidify that and maybe be the long-term answer at that nickel cornerback spot, where the Falcons have also had kind of a revolving door over the last 4 or 5 years. And then you have Jesse Bates at safety. Of course, Justin Simmons, probably on a 1-year deal, probably not a guy that you're expecting to play, 3 to 5 years here in Atlanta. But if the Falcons can get 1 or 2 really good years out of Justin Simmons, that's going to be great in terms of stabilizing their secondary. So a lot of pieces that you like long-term, like AJ Terrell, potentially D. Alford, still an open question mark about that opposite cornerback spot. Maybe you have your 4th round second-year player in Clark Phillips. Maybe he takes that job from Mike Hughes over the course of the season, and then maybe that gives you some long-term outlook there. But the Falcons secondary is looking pretty solid for the short term and has some really sort of foundational pieces, especially with AJ Terrell and Jesse Bates there for the long term.
Yeah, upgraded defensive play is going to be a big part of hopeful improved Atlanta season. But obviously, Aaron, the other big part is Kirk Cousins, and I hope he'll be able to respond coming off of his injury. Has a bunch of weapons to throw the football to. But year 1 of Kirk Cousins in Atlanta, what are your expectations?
I'm expecting a big upgrade to what the Falcons have had the last couple of years under Desmond Ridder and Marcus Mariota, but I'm not expecting to get the best version of Kirk Cousins coming off that injury, even though he's familiar with this style of offense as Zach Robinson, the Falcons offensive coordinator, is going to run, coming from the McVay system. Obviously, Kirk coming from Kevin O'Connell, which is a McVay offense, playing under Sean McVay way back in the day in Washington, all that and more. There's some familiarity there, but I'm not expecting Kirk to put his best foot forward coming off the Achilles. We know that's an injury that usually it takes the better part of 2 years for guys to come back to where they're looking like they did prior to that injury. And then at that point, Kirk's going to be 37, pushing 38 at that point in time. So to me, I'm expecting Kirk's best to be next year when he's fully recovered, has a year in the offense, has familiarity with all the Falcons' weapons. But in the short term, in 2024, I am expecting a top half of the league quarterback, and that's much better than what the Falcons have gotten the last couple of years. And that should be good enough in the NFC South to win the division, given that you don't have too many of those guys that you can firmly say, like Baker Mayfield's coming off a good year. Derek Carr has been in the top half of the league the last couple of years, but he's playing a new system. Wasn't looking like that for most of last season. And then who knows what Bryce Young is. So, even if Kirk is like the 13th best quarterback in the league this year, that should still be the best quarterback in the division, and that should be good enough with all the other pieces the Falcons have to get them back into the playoffs and win that division.
Aaron is amazing. And for more on Aaron and his Falcons coverage, check him out over at Locked On Falcons, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. That's all I have for you here today on this Monday edition of Locked On NFL. Really appreciate it again, everybody tuning in, listening, watching, however you consume more content. Coming up tomorrow, more NFL content with your Tuesday host. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On NFL.